My dad missed my graduation because of my stepsister, then tried to make up for it with a $15 gift card. Hey there, welcome to Story Nest. Subscribing is a small way to show support, but it helps a lot and keeps the stories coming. The air in my room felt suffocating as my dad dropped the bombshell on me. I had been counting down the days to my high school graduation. So much was riding on it. It wasn't just a ceremony. It was my moment, my chance to stand on the stage, to make my mom proud in a way I could finally feel. But 2 nights ago, everything changed. Dad casually told me that his stepdaughter, my 14-year-old sister, I use the term loosely, had won a competition in another state and was going to be honored for it on the same day as my graduation. I can't make it to both, son, he said, almost apologetically, but there was a finality in his tone that told me his mind was already made up. Her mom and the rest of the family are going, and she really wants me there. I'll make it up to you, I swear. We'll celebrate another time. Another time. That phrase stung worse than I anticipated. It wasn't the first time he had put his stepdaughter ahead of me, but hearing it in the context of my graduation, it hit different. My throat tightened, and a cold wave of frustration surged through me. I still lived with him, but not for much longer. After my mom passed when I was just 7, my dad had remarried when I was around 12. I guess it's not unusual to feel a little neglected after a new family is formed, but this wasn't a casual shift. It felt like a sudden abandonment. For the past several years, it was clear his priorities had changed. And I was starting to feel invisible. My dad tried to justify it. You could try harder to bond with her. I don't want you to just focus on me. It didn't matter that we never had that kind of father-son relationship anymore. He'd pushed me away for so long that it was impossible to try to connect with her. I was expected to just accept this new dynamic, to be happy when he chose her over me. He started skipping my basketball games to attend her dance recitals, even if my game was scheduled first. I remember one instance, feeling the heat of embarrassment as I watched him leave to support her again. It's what she needs, he'd say. But what about what I needed? It wasn't just the sports or the missed milestones. It was the small, everyday things too. It was the way our family outings were planned, with my dad and his wife always deferring to her daughter. Whenever it came time for us to decide on activities, it was never about me. Even if it was supposed to be my turn to pick, the moment their daughter spoke up, my dad's face would light up. Well, we should do what she wants, huh? It'll be the most fun for everyone, he'd say, giving her a warm smile. Meanwhile, I just sat there, silently pushed aside. I wasn't blind to the favoritism. It was hard not to see. I tried to keep my feelings to myself, but it was becoming harder and harder to ignore. After years of watching my dad's attention slowly shift away from me, I was tired. I wanted to matter again. I wanted to feel like his son. But that wasn't going to happen, not with her around. One day, everything seemed to come to a head. Our refrigerator and shower broke at the same time, an unfortunate but fixable issue. I thought, okay, maybe this is the moment where he'll step up. After all, I had my own birthday coming up, and he had promised me something special. I'd been dreaming of a new gaming monitor and keyboard for my computer, a gift that I was told would be mine when my birthday rolled around. But instead, he made a decision that would shake me to my core. With his stepdaughter's birthday approaching, Dad took money from my birthday fund to pay for the broken appliances. His explanation? It's what's best for the household. But it wasn't just that. He didn't stop there. He told me that his stepdaughter was getting what she wanted, this expensive Barbie house and a whole fashion set that cost nearly $250. Meanwhile, I could only stare at him in disbelief as he explained that he hadn't even been able to put all the money back in time for my birthday. When my big day finally came, I felt more like an afterthought than anything else. Instead of the thoughtful, meaningful gift I had been promised, I got a $30 Steam gift card. A small, impersonal token compared to what had been promised and to what she had gotten. I swallowed my anger, But it was hard not to feel completely discarded, like my worth had suddenly been reduced to something small and replaceable. I tried not to let it show, but the hurt was too overwhelming. Then came the day I had been anticipating, the day of my graduation. The one day that was supposed to be all about me, my achievements, my future. It should have been my dad there, front and center, celebrating me. But instead, he was more concerned about his stepdaughter and her competition award. When he told me he wouldn't be coming to my graduation because he needed to support her, my world felt like it was crumbling. I remember standing there, staring at him in shock, my chest tight with disbelief. There was no sugarcoating it. "I can't make it to both," he had said, as though it were a simple scheduling issue. I didn't want to hear his explanations anymore. I didn't want him to promise me something vague in the future. His words echoed in my head. "I'll make it up to you." Make it up to me? How? How could he make up for something that had been building for years? I wasn't going to let him brush this under the rug. "No," I said, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "You can forget about trying to make it up to me. I'm done." I wasn't angry in the usual sense. It wasn't a burst of rage. It was more like a deep, crushing sadness that spread through me. I had been patient. I had tried to hold on. But now I realized he was never going to change. I was always going to come second to her, his little princess. And I wasn't okay with that. I couldn't stand being invisible in my own life anymore. "I'm done," I repeated, my voice shaking. "I don't want anything to do with this anymore. You've discarded me for the last time, Dad." He tried to reason with me, to apologize, but I was already walking away. His voice, full of desperation, faded as I left the room. "Please, just be reasonable, son. Let's talk about this." But there was no talking. Not anymore. The days leading up to the graduation felt like a blur. I wanted to feel excited. This was my moment, after all. But all I could think about was how my dad's absence was casting a shadow over everything. The disappointment in his decision was almost too much to bear. Every conversation I had with him felt hollow, like there was this unspoken divide that had always been there, but now it was gaping wide open. There was no denying it anymore. He wasn't the dad I once knew. He had chosen her, and I had become nothing more than an afterthought. I did what I could to cope, but I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't want to keep pretending like everything was fine. I tried calling both sets of grandparents, figuring they would at least be there for me when my dad wasn't. They, of course, were more than willing to show up. They agreed to come, all of them. But even then, I couldn't help but feel this overwhelming sense of isolation. It shouldn't have to be like this. It shouldn't have been so hard to get my dad's attention. The night before my graduation, my dad's wife cornered me in the kitchen. I had been pacing around the house, trying to wrap my mind around what had just happened when she approached me with that familiar, condescending tone. "You know," she began, "you could come with us to her ceremony tomorrow. You don't have to go to your own graduation if you really don't want to." She gave me a tight smile, the kind that made my skin crawl. "You could support your sister." I recoiled, the word hanging in the air like a slap. "Your sister." I had heard that phrase 1,000 times before, but now it felt foreign, almost insulting. I wasn't going to pretend to be close to her. I wasn't going to fake some familial bond just because my dad had decided to make her his priority. "She's not my sister," I said firmly, my voice cold. "She's your daughter, not mine. And I don't owe her anything." The look on her face was something I won't forget, hurt, confusion, and then a flash of anger. She tried to argue, but I wasn't having it. "I've had enough of all this. You're not going to guilt-trip me into supporting your family anymore. I don't want to be a part of it. I'll be out of your way soon enough." I could see the tension in her face. She wasn't used to someone standing up to her. "You're being selfish," she snapped, her voice rising. "How could you deny her a father? She needs him, and you can't even understand that." Her words stung, but I wasn't backing down. "She has a dad, just not the one I had. I'm done with this, with all of you." I turned my back on her, the tension in my chest finally starting to settle, though the hurt remained. I wasn't going to play their game anymore. The next day was a blur of mixed emotions. On one hand, I was surrounded by my grandparents, who had come to cheer me on, but on the other, I couldn't shake the sense of betrayal. As I walked across the stage to collect my diploma, all I could think about was how my dad wasn't there. I glanced at the empty seats in the audience and felt this hollow ache in my chest. I knew I'd never forget the day my dad chose his stepdaughter over me. That choice wasn't just about missing one event. It was about the years of subtle, painful neglect that had led to this moment. I tried to tell myself that I was okay, that I didn't need him to be there. But deep down, I knew it would always hurt. After the graduation, I didn't have much to say to anyone. I tried to put on a brave face for my grandparents, who were beyond proud of me, but inside, I was still reeling. My mind kept replaying that moment on the stage, how my dad wasn't there. It felt like the final nail in the coffin. It wasn't just that he wasn't physically present, it was that he'd chosen not to be there. His absence stung more than anything. As the evening wore on, the celebrations felt empty. I forced myself through the motions. Thanking people for their kind words, taking photos for memories I wasn't sure I even wanted. My mind kept wandering back to that conversation with my dad. The way he looked at me when I told him I was done. The desperation in his eyes, begging me to understand, begging me to just be reasonable. But the truth was, I had tried for years. I had tried to make him see me, to make him care. And each time, I was met with silence or excuses. It was too much to ignore now. He had made his choice, and I had to live with it. Later that evening, my dad came to me, his face full of regret. He stood in my doorway, looking awkward and unsure of how to begin. "Son," he started, his voice low. "I know things have been hard between us. I'm sorry you feel the way you do. I never meant to make you feel like you weren't important." I didn't answer right away. He took a step closer, his voice pleading. "I want to make things right. I really do. Can we talk about it?" For a moment, I just stared at him, unsure of how to respond. I had spent so many years trying to reach him, to get him to see me, to make him realize that I was still his son. But now it felt like too little, too late. His apology, while genuine, didn't change what had already happened. The damage had been done. And honestly, I wasn't sure if I even had the energy left to forgive him. Talk about what? I finally said, my words coming out colder than I intended. "I've heard it all before, Dad. You've apologized before. But nothing changes. You've always chosen her, and I'm just supposed to accept it." My voice cracked, but I fought the tears. "You're never going to be the dad I needed. You've made that clear." His face fell. I could see the pain in his eyes, but it didn't move me. I had spent too many years pretending it didn't hurt. Now it was too much to bear. "I don't know what you want from me," he whispered, almost to himself. "I've tried my best." I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping me. "Your best isn't good enough. Not anymore." And with that, I turned away from him. There was nothing left to say. I had made my peace with the fact that I couldn't change what was, and that maybe it was time for me to walk away from this relationship. I didn't want to keep hoping for something that was never going to come. The following days were a blur of mixed emotions. My dad tried reaching out to me several times, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. Each time he texted or called, I felt that familiar wave of frustration and sadness. I had made my decision, and I didn't want to get pulled back into a cycle of empty apologies and unfulfilled promises. The more I distanced myself, the clearer it became that there was no fixing this. Our relationship had been fractured for too long, and I wasn't sure there was enough left to rebuild it. I spent more time with my grandparents in those days than I had in months. Their support meant the world to me. They listened without judgment and never tried to explain away my dad's behavior. They understood. They were the only ones who made me feel like I wasn't alone. They were the only ones who reminded me that I was still worthy of love and respect, even if my dad couldn't give me those things. One evening, after dinner with them, I found myself sitting in the quiet of my room. I thought back to my childhood, to the memories of my mom before she passed. The warmth of those days felt like a distant dream. I had been so young when she died, but I still remembered her love, the way she made me feel safe, seen, and valued. When my dad remarried, I had hoped that maybe, just maybe, I would still feel that same connection, that same bond. But over time, that hope withered away. My dad had made a new family, and it felt like he no longer had room for me in his heart. I couldn't deny it anymore. The bitterness, the hurt, it was all consuming. I wasn't just angry at him for prioritizing his stepdaughter over me, for missing my basketball games and choosing her over my birthday. I was angry at myself for letting it go on for so long, for pretending I didn't see the way he treated me like a second-class citizen in my own home. And yet, despite all the hurt, I couldn't fully let go. I thought about the times my dad had been there for me, back when I was younger. The memories weren't all bad, after all. He had been my hero at one point. And that was the hardest part, the fact that I could still remember what it felt like to be his son, the way he used to look at me with pride. But the truth was, I wasn't that boy anymore. I had grown up, and so had my dad. And the man I had hoped would be my father was no longer there. As the days passed, I found myself slipping into a routine that didn't involve my dad at all. I focused on what was in front of me, school, my future, the people who actually cared about me. I spent more time with my friends, leaned on my grandparents, and buried myself in the excitement and anxiety of what came next, leaving home, starting college, finding my own way. But even as I moved forward, there was a nagging ache in my chest that wouldn't go away. It was a hollow, gnawing feeling, the kind you get when something important is missing from your life. One afternoon, about a week after graduation, I was packing up my things in my room when my dad knocked on my door. He had been giving me space, which I appreciated, but I could tell this was a different visit. There was an uncertainty in his eyes, an almost hesitant energy. He opened the door slowly, and I felt a wave of emotion hit me all over again. It was hard to ignore the bond we once shared, the way we used to be so close. But now it felt like there was a chasm between us, something too deep to cross. "Son," he began, his voice quiet. "Can we talk?" I didn't respond right away, but I could tell he wasn't going to leave until I acknowledged him. Sighing, I leaned against my desk, crossing my arms. I wasn't sure what he wanted, but I wasn't in the mood for a half-hearted apology or an attempt to fix things with another empty promise. He took a deep breath, clearly struggling with his words. "I know I've messed up. I can see that now. And I don't want you to think I don't care about you, because I do. I've always cared. But I also know I've hurt you, and I know I've made a lot of mistakes." His voice cracked on the last words, and I could see the weight of regret in his eyes. It was almost painful to watch, especially because it felt too little, too late. "You don't get it, Dad," I said, the frustration spilling out of me before I could stop it. "You've been choosing her over me for years. You don't get to just say you're sorry now and expect everything to go back to normal." I could feel the anger rising inside of me again, the years of neglect and hurt coming to the surface. "You've been making promises to me for so long, and every time, you break them. I'm not some backup, and I'm not going to keep pretending like I'm okay with being second to her." He stepped closer, and I could see the pain etched in his face. I didn't want to feel sorry for him anymore, but part of me still did. I couldn't help it. He was my dad, and for all his faults, there was still a part of me that wanted to believe we could fix this. "I've been so focused on her," he admitted, voice raw. "I see how much she needs me, and I got lost in that. But I see now that I've been neglecting you. And I don't want to lose you, son. I can't." I stared at him, feeling the conflict in my chest. On the one hand, I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to tell him how much he had hurt me, how much he had let me down. But on the other, there was that part of me, buried deep down, that just wanted my dad back. The dad who used to take me fishing, the The dad who would play basketball with me in the driveway for hours. The dad who used to sit with me on the couch, watching old movies, cracking jokes about anything and everything. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said, my voice quieter now, almost a whisper. I don't know if I can trust you again. He nodded slowly, his eyes filling with something close to tears. I understand. I know I've broken that trust. But I'm asking for the chance to rebuild it, one step at a time. I can't fix everything in one conversation, but I don't want to give up on us. It was hard to look at him. I could see how much he was hurting, but it didn't make the pain I felt go away. It didn't undo the years of neglect, the broken promises. The silence between us stretched out, and I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Could I really give him another chance? Could I allow myself to believe in the possibility of a father-son relationship again after everything? I need time, I said finally, my voice steady but firm. I need time to think about this. I'm not going to just forgive you because you say sorry. It's going to take more than that. He nodded, accepting my response without protest. I'll wait. I'll be here when you're ready, whenever that is. I wanted to tell him that I didn't need him anymore, that I was better off without him. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the truth. I had always wanted my dad to be there for me, to care the way he used to. But at the same time, I couldn't deny the way his actions had hurt me. The pain wasn't something I could just shake off. That night, I found myself lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything. The truth was, I wasn't sure what I wanted. I wasn't sure if I could ever fully let go of the past, or if I could ever forgive him for the years I had lost. But I knew one thing for sure, I had to find my own way forward. The next few weeks were quieter, but the tension remained. My dad and I didn't talk much after that night. He tried, of course, texting me every now and then, asking if I needed anything or if we could hang out. But I couldn't bring myself to engage. I wasn't ready. The wounds were still too fresh, and I wasn't sure if I was willing to risk reopening them. I spent most of my time preparing for the next chapter of my life, college. For once, it felt like there was something ahead of me that was mine to shape, mine to own. I felt a sense of control that I hadn't had in a long time. For years, I had been waiting for my dad to see me, to make me feel like I mattered. But now, as I packed my bags and made plans to leave, I realized something that had been buried deep down. I had been waiting for him to make me feel worthy. And the truth was, I didn't need him for that anymore. I didn't need anyone to validate my worth. The morning I was leaving, my dad came to see me before I left for good. He didn't say much, just stood in the doorway, looking at me as I stuffed the last of my clothes into a suitcase. There was an air of finality in the room, and as I turned to face him, I felt both a sense of relief and sorrow. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. There was that look again, the look of a man who knew he had failed, a man who was trying to fix something he wasn't sure could be fixed. I didn't answer immediately. The answer had already been given, and I think we both knew it. This wasn't just about the graduation or the basketball games. This was about everything that had led up to it. About years of feeling like I was in his shadow, like I was second best, like I didn't matter enough to be his priority. "I'm sure," I said finally, my voice steady. "I need to do this for myself. I can't keep living in the past, waiting for you to be the dad I want. I've got to go forward now." His eyes seemed to glisten for a moment, but he quickly looked away. "I understand," he said, his voice almost breaking. "I'll always love you, son. You know that, right?" I nodded, the lump in my throat too big to swallow. "I know, Dad. I know." And with that, I walked out the door. I didn't look back. As the days turned into weeks, I settled into my new life at college. It was everything I had hoped for: freedom, new experiences, new people. But even as I made new memories, there was a part of me that still carried the weight of the past. The pain didn't disappear overnight, but it became more bearable. I knew I couldn't change what had happened with my dad. And honestly, I wasn't sure if I ever would be able to forgive him completely. But I also knew I couldn't keep holding on to the hurt. It was time to let go for my own sake. I stayed in touch with my grandparents more than I did with my dad. They were a constant source of love and understanding, and I felt their support in ways I hadn't before. I didn't need to be his son anymore to feel like I mattered. I was carving out my own space in the world, and that was enough. The story of my relationship with my dad wasn't a fairy tale, and it probably never would be. But I've learned something valuable through all the pain and disappointment. Sometimes, you have to let go of the people who can't be there for you in the way you need. And sometimes, that's the only way you can heal. I didn't know what the future held for my relationship with my dad, but I also knew that I had my own path to walk now. And no matter what happened, I would walk it with my head held high. That's it for today's story. If you want to hear more, hit subscribe and leave a like. Your support means a lot.